I'll now show you how to use a for loop together with an array. To do so, I'll show you an algorithm to find the largest number in an array. So let's suppose we have a group of people and we store their ages in an array of integers. The goal is to find the eldest. So we need to find the maximum value of all the ages stored in the array. So let's get started. First of all, we need an array to store all of our ages. So those are integer type variables. And let's call the array ages. And let's say we want to store 10 ages. So let's make it a size 10 here. And just to make things a little bit easier, we're going to read those ages from the user input, but rather than having to type them in every time I run this program, I'm going to switch to a split input-output session here where I can just put the whole input in at once. So the ages that just appeared at the bottom of the screen are 75, 9, 34, 66, 23, and so forth. And I just pasted them in there. I can read them with scanf just as if it was an interactive session, but that way I don't have to retype them every time. So it's more laziness than anything else. If you prefer to run this in interactive mode, you totally can do that. All right, so here is my array of ages. And now I'm going to need to read in all of these ages. And I could definitely do this by hand. I could simply say, I want to scanf, and I'm going to read an integer. And where am I going to put that integer? So I want to read the first age and put it in ages of 0. Ages of 0 is like a variable name of an integer type variable. So how do I put something in there with scanf? I need to put the ampersand in front of it. I could absolutely do this and then repeat it for ages of 1, ages of 2, all the way up to ages of 10. But then I have to write 10 lines of code here that are all pretty much the same. They only differ by the 0, 1, 2, by that index. And that sounds an awful lot like a loop could help us. So rather than doing this by hand 10 times, I'm going to use a for loop that repeats 10 times. How do I write a for loop that repeats 10 times? First of all, I need my loop counter, int I, and then I simply type for I from 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. So this is a for loop that repeats 10 times. I open curly braces, and then I also need a closing curly brace right here. I'm going to indent my scanf so it looks better. And now instead of just reading ages of 0, I want to vary where the result of the scanf is put. So I'm going to make that ages of I. Because when I is equal to 0, I'm going to read an age into ages of 0. Then I will increase to 1, and I'm going to put the next value that I read into ages of 1, and so forth. And so there we go. Let's actually try this out and run this. But if we run it like this, we're not printing out anything. We can't really check whether things worked or didn't. So in order for us to be able to see whether this actually worked and all these numbers ended up in my array, there's a wonderful visualization utility that comes with Codecast. It's not something that is available with other tools. It's a Codecast specific line that I'm going to type here. And what I typed is 2 slashes, so it makes it into a comment. So this code would still run in other compilers, but it wouldn't do the visualization the way Codecast will do it for you. So 2 slashes and an exclamation mark indicates to Codecast, okay, this is a special command that only exists in Codecast. And the command that I put in here is show array. I want to visualize the array. And what's the array I want to visualize? It's called ages. That's the name of my array right here that stores the ages. And then there's a comma, and I also want to show my value of I. So cursors is another directive towards Codecast, and it shows that I want to display what the current value of I is so that we can really follow along. So let's compile this, and we're going to execute this code step by step. So rather than running it all at once, we're going to do a step-by-step execution. So first of all, ages is going to be declared as an array with 10 entries. And here you see the visualization popping up. So there are indeed 10 spaces numbered from 0 through 9. Remember, arrays are indexed starting at 0 in C. Here you see something else that's specific to Codecast. Zeros have been put into all the elements of the array for you. That will not happen automatically in other tools that you use. In particular, that will not happen in the tool that we use to evaluate your code for correctness when you submit homework assignments. So please do not get used to that. It's a Codecast specific thing. Next, we declare our variable I. There it is. And we get into our for loop. So I is initialized as 0 in the next step. And the for loop now checks whether I is less than 10. I is indeed still less than 10 because it's just 0. And so we enter the for loop. And there next comes our scanf statement. So we're going to scan, we're going to read into ages of I. Since I is 0, you can see that indicated in the little picture below. We're going to put a value that we read into ages of 0. Let's do that and see what happened. The 75 was read from the input and was put into ages of 0. Next, in my for loop, I is increased. So I now points to 1. I has the value 1. We check the termination condition. Is it still true that I is less than 10? Well, yes, it is. And so we get to another scanf statement. This time, since I is 1, we're going to modify ages of 1. So the next value that we read will be put into ages of 1. And there it is. We read a 9, and that 9 was put into ages of 1. Again, I is increased. The termination condition is not met yet, so we're going to read another value into ages of 2, and the 34 was put in there. And then we keep going like this. We keep going, we keep going. We read all these values from the input. And now all of a sudden, I has the value 9. 9 is still less than 10. And so we're going to do another scanf and put the last value that we haven't read yet into ages of 9. So the 74 was read. I is increased. I now has the value 10. All of a sudden, I is no longer strictly less than 10 because 10 is not strictly less than 10, which means we no longer enter the loop, rather we exit the loop. When we exit the loop, the program will terminate. And so indeed, we have read all the values from the input and they are now stored in the array. So the program terminates. And so all we have to do now is we need to find the maximum. How do we do that? Well, here's the idea. We're going to read through the array one by one and compare numbers to a current maximum. So the maximum of the values I've read so far. If I read something that's bigger than the maximum I've found so far, then I replace the maximum I've found so far with this new value. That's all we need to do. So we need a variable to hold that maximum. What we call it age max. And it's good to initialize that as 0. No age is going to be less than 0. So the maximum is going to be at least 0. So that's a good way to initialize my maximum here. And then each time after I read a value, I'm going to compare that value to the current maximum that I have found. And if it's bigger, then I'm going to update the current maximum. So how do I do that? That sounds like an if statement. So if ages of I, that's the value I just read. If that's greater than the current maximum, age max, well, then I need to replace age max with this new updated value that's going to be bigger. So in that case, I say age max is equal to ages of I. If the value, on the other hand, that I read is not greater than age max, I don't need to do anything. Age max is still the current maximum. Let's run this again. Let's compile and run step by step to see what happens. So ages is initialized. There's my I. Age max is initialized. I step into my for loop. I is 0, which is less than 10. I read the first value, which is that 75, and put it into ages of I. So now I get to this if statement. Is ages of I 0. So is ages of 0 greater than age max? Well, ages of 0 is 75, the number I just read. Age max is currently 0, the value I initialized it with. So indeed, ages of I is greater than age max. 75 is greater than 0. And so I get to execute this statement inside the if condition. And indeed, I'm going to say age max gets updated with ages of 0. And you can see that in the variable editor, all of a sudden, age max has the value 75. Next, I is increased. I is now 1. It's still less than 10. I read in the next number into ages of 1. That's a 9. And I check whether this number, ages of 1, is greater than age max. Ages of 1 is 9. The current age max is 75. 9 is not greater than 75. So the condition is not satisfied, so I'm going to skip right to the next I++. The condition was not satisfied in the if statement. I is now increased to 2. It's still less than 10. And the next number is read from the input. So I'm reading that 34. And 34 is checked against age max. Age max is still 75. 34 is not greater than 75. And so again, nothing happens. I is increased. I is now 3. It's still less than 10. I'm reading the 66, which is not greater than the current maximum. So we skip this again. I is increased to 4. And I read the 23. It's not greater than the current maximum of 75. I is increased to 5. And next I read the 78. Now, 78 is greater than 75. And so we expect to enter this if statement. And indeed we do. And age max now gets updated with this new value 78. So now age max has the value 78. And then again, I go through this a few more times until I get to the end. I've read all the values. I'm just reading the 74. 74 is not greater than age max. I is increased to 10. I exit the loop and I'm done. So now that the program is terminated, I see age max indeed holds the value of 78, the largest age that is stored in the array. So the only thing that's left to do is print that out. I need to print out in the end, I need to tell the user what's the largest age in the array. Where do I do that? I need to do that after I'm done with the entire for loop. So all this needs to be done. I need to have read every single value and put it in the array and compared it to age max. So that means I need to wait until the for loop has terminated. And right here, I can print out the result. So printf, the maximum age is %d, age max. And now just to demonstrate that we could do this just as well in interactive mode, I'm going to run this program in interactive mode. So we're going to compile and run. And now I need to actually type in some ages. So let's see if I can remember what the ages were. 75, and then the 9, and then we had a 34, and a 66. And you can see the array filling up slowly as I'm typing in these ages. 23, 78, 53, 23, 11, 74, and there's the output. The maximum age is 75.